Welcome to Audio Gyan with Kedar Nimkar, a podcast that documents insightful conversations with Indian designers, artists, musicians, writers, thinkers and creatives of all types. Catch us on iTunes or visit audiogyan.com for more Gyan sessions. Here's your host Kedar Nimkar.
Today I have Mahendra Chauhan with us on Audio Gyan. Mahendra is a head of design at Titan. He did his design from NID and is famous for designing the Titan Edge watch, which is the world's slimmest watch. He has won Red Dot Award and many other national and international awards and is India's one of the finest designers. With over 12 years of experience in the industry, Mahendra has indeed taken up the watch industry and the watch design space with a storm. And today we are here to discuss more about it. So thank you, Mahendra, for giving us your time and welcome to Audio Gyan.
Thank you, Kedar. This is absolutely privilege to be part of this show.
Yeah. Thank you. So Mahendra, can you tell us what is the brief history of watches across the world?
So actually history of watches in India is not that old.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I will take you through global history of timekeeping and then we'll come to India.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first known time-telling device was found in Egypt. Okay. And that was in Valley of Kings and it was dated 1500 BC.
Okay.
So that was a sundial. Okay. So sundial is actually shadow clock. And it requires extreme amount of craftsmanship and very precise knowledge of latitude and longitude to make them work flawlessly. But knowing Egyptians and the kind of things which they've done in the past, for them it was not a very challenging task. So they have mastered this whole art of making sundial. Okay, but sundial was having a lot of limitations. Okay, you can't see time during cloudy weather or during sea voyages where your coordinates kept on changing. But in spite of all this, sundial was very effective tool for timekeeping for many centuries. Okay, in fact till 14th century to be more precise. Well, 14th century is a golden century for timekeeping, I would say that. Because this was a century when Da Vinci and a lot of creative designers, they were experimenting on new kind of machines and mechanisms. Okay, and these guys, they started installing big clocks in the public squares. Okay, so if you visit Venice or Prague, the famous tower clocks are essentially from this time. Okay, so the 14th century is known as a very golden century for timekeeping in general. So what happened that as time progressed, slowly these bigger clocks, they have started becoming smaller and more portable, and pocket watch was formed. So you can say that it took almost 200 years from those bigger clocks to transform into something which is more smaller, into pocket watch format. So as time progressed, slowly the bigger clocks have started becoming smaller and portable, and pocket watch was born. So this is, I think, 17th century. But Kedar, you won't believe that till then nobody's ever thought to use these devices on wrist. Okay. So it was only during the First World War, early 18th century, when these soldiers, they started using wrist-based devices on the wrist for effective timekeeping, wristwatch was born. So that's the, you can say the birth of wristwatches. And since then, Swiss and German watchmakers, they have taken this whole industry to completely new level. So they've started investing a lot of money into mechanisms and new functions, and rest of all is very known history. Now, coming back to India, well, India was heavily dominated by HMT and Allwins of the world. Okay, so they were state-run companies. But when 1987 Titan was born, Titan has changed the watch scene completely. So Titan spotted a huge potential in quartz mechanism. Okay. And we've launched our first collection in 1989, and that was called Titan Accura. So Accura was inspired from word accurate, and quartz mechanisms were generally more accurate than mechanical watches, essentially. And that collection has done so well for Titan. And since then, every year we're launching collections by collection. And now we have 55% of market share.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. So, if you can very quickly tell us the difference between the quartz and the mechanical part. For a layman, what is the difference between a quartz and a mechanical watch?
So Kedar, if you see the mechanical watches or automatic watches, okay, they are highly ornate and they are run by pure mechanism. Okay, and most of the devices, they run by mainspring and rotor. Okay. While quartz watches, they have electronic circuit. Okay, so they are like any other electronic product. So there's a PCB and there's a quartz crystal. Okay, and quartz crystal has a frequency. So it runs on 32,678 hertz per second. Okay, so that frequency defines the circuit, completes the circuit. So quartz watches are very easy to make. It's easy to manufacture, and probably the battery consumption is also very low. So in that way, quartz watches are very mass production friendly. While automatic watches are extremely precise in terms of the manufacturing technique, but they are also very expensive to make.
Yeah, I think that's why these high-end Rolex automatic watches are slightly...
Yeah, most of the Swiss industry, they work on automatics. Yeah, luxury watch market is always about automatics.
So how is a watch designed and manufactured?
Well, Kedar, watches are highly unique products. Okay, and they are the probably only live ticking machine which you wear on your body on a daily basis. Okay, so in that perspective, it is extremely important to know, especially as a watch designer, for whom you're designing for, essentially your customer, your end customer. So as long as you have visibility and understanding of the end customer, then the whole design process becomes much simpler. Okay, but still there are 5 important pillars which defines most of the design philosophy behind Titan watches. Okay, so they are, you can very well say that they are strength of Titan, their design philosophy of Titan in that way. So first and foremost is the concept of desirability. Okay. So our watches have to be desirable enough to be picked from the stores where hundreds of other watches of competitors also displayed in its full glory. Okay, so the desirability quotient of the watches should be really high. So this is the fundamental principles on which we work with.
Sorry, I'll cut you here. These fundamental principles are from a designer standpoint or from an overall company standpoint?
From overall company standpoint.
Okay, continue. Yeah.
Second thing is about functionality. Okay, so watches should not be just a piece of art. They have a purpose to serve. Okay, the fonts, the typefaces which we use, they have to be legible. Form has to be ergonomic. Watch should hug the wrist very well. Watch should serve the purpose of time telling. Okay, so these are the fundamental functionality which we don't compromise in terms of watches. Third, and in fact one of the very important thing with respect to the Tata group, it's about concept of authenticity. Okay, so our watches have to be authentic. So be it in terms of design details or the service which we offer, or the material which we source, or the kind of finish, non-toxic plating which we use, authentic design details are must for all our watches. So I think this is one of the really important principle behind Titan watches. Fourth pillar is about dynamism, and our watches have to be dynamic in character, because if you see, time is very dynamic. It's always moving, it's always ticking. So we have defined it as a fundamental pillar of our design philosophy. Fifth, and I think this is the most important principle in a way, is about concept of expressiveness. Okay. Because we just don't design watches. We design watches which narrate a story. So every watch of the particular collection should narrate a story to consumer. Okay. So the concept of expression, via product is very important for us. So concept of expressiveness is very important part of our design philosophy. So these are the fundamental 5 principles which define most of our watches. In terms of manufacturing, I think the whole expanse is wide and open. Okay, you will have watches which are handmade, hand polished, while on other hand you will have watches which are made in 5-axis CNC machines, and even polishing is done by robotic hands. So it all depends upon what kind of money which you are putting behind the watch. But the thumb rule is, the more expensive the watch, more it will celebrate craftsmanship. Craftsmanship of technology, craftsmanship of finishing. But in general, most of the watches, they are made by forming. So you take a steel or metal blank, and you have to go with forming of multiple times to get the desired look. And every watch goes in multiple stages of operation and multiple stages of finishing before it comes on your wrist.
That's very interesting. And so what are the nuances which make then each watch different? Like as you mentioned just now about the craftsmanship, are there any more parameters on which each watch is uniquely identified or fits a particular segment, or how does that work exactly?
Well, Kedar, watch is made of 4 different components. Okay, so you'll have a bezel ring with a glass, either mineral or sapphire. Then you have a case, okay, which contains essentially a mechanism, hands and dial, and this is very important part of the watch. Then you have a back cover, okay. So back cover is the closure of the container, and it helps you to make water resistant watches essentially. And lastly, you will have leather or metal bracelet, okay, which completes the overall look. So these 4 components defines the watch, but there are 4 external factors, okay. They define the differentiation which we can offer in the watch, okay. So we call it as a quadrant of design differentiation, okay. First and foremost is the consumer profiling, okay. Consumer profiling is very important to define the form language of the watch, okay. I'll give you an example, like a watch designed for a traveler would be very different from a watch which is designed for an athlete, okay. Similarly, a watch designed for a scuba diver would be really different from a watch designed for a bike rider or people who love biking, okay. So the needs of the consumer or the desires of the consumer makes a completely different form language of the watch, okay. So consumer profiling is an extremely important part of design differentiation. Second part is the mechanism, okay. So mechanism is the core of the watch, okay. It is the motor which drives the watch essentially. So fundamentally there are 3 kinds of mechanism, okay. So there is a automatic mechanism, automatic or mechanical, you can say that. Second is the quartz. Third is the smart module or smart mechanism, okay. So smart module is the latest entry into the system. What is more important for us is to figure out what function these mechanisms are going to serve, okay. Like, do you want a watch which will have 1/100 seconds of chronograph with the tachymeter function, or will it be a watch which will just measure your activity and give you probably heart rate, or do you want a watch which is just a plain 3 hand and everything, there's no other detail in it, okay. So there are hundreds of mechanisms which can be used, modified or customized to define the look of the watch. So mechanism plays a very important role in differentiating any design, okay. Third point is the design character itself, okay. So it is the strongest element which help us to differentiate one watch from another. This is also designer's playfield, okay. So product semantics plays very important role. The kind of line, curve, geometry, proportion, texture, whatever you use, it helps us to differentiate one watch from another, okay. So design character is the core of watch design in general, okay. Last but very important is the price point, okay. Because price point can define or dictate form language, okay. So what kind of module which I am going to use, what kind of finishing which I am going to propose in the watch, in fact the kind of material which we'll opt for, or the production methods, everything is governed by hard reality of price point. So price point also is one major design differentiator. So these fundamentally there are 4 design differentiator. So you'll have price point, then there's a mechanism, then there's a design character, and the most important is the consumer profile, which help us to define every new design in a very interesting way.
So I'm just curious to ask you here, and earlier also as you mentioned that the craftsmanship or those also define the price point. So from a manufacturer standpoint, these things are very clear, but what the manufacturer thinks is it being represented in a showroom where the people go and buy watches? Are people really sensitive to go in for a particular segment, or they are just like as price point only? Like how sensitive are general buyers also to these things?
So Kedar, it all depends upon people to people, so there are certain people who are really sensitive about design details. Okay, so they will not compromise on various parameters, while for some, I think the price point is the only differentiator which matters. So it's completely depend upon what kind of price segments you operate with. But in general, I've seen in India people are evolving towards design sensibility. So you will have set of people who are really appreciative of such kind of design details.
Yeah, but the main reason for people to become sensitive is also the manufacturers and the service providers who are crafting it in a certain way that the people see the difference and then value it.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So going back a bit and trying to ask you again, what are the challenges while building a watch? I mean, I would like to just have a comparison between what were the challenges maybe 20 years back and now with the new like technology empowerment. What are the new challenges?
Well, 20 years ago I was not in watch industry, so my perception might not be that correct. But if I would imagine a scenario, then probably that was the world when internet was just starting up, and Google was not even born, and computers were big and bulky. Processing speed was super slow, and in terms of manufacturing, I think CNC machines were very far and fewer. Okay. So clearly that was a very different world. Okay, but with respect to watch, or if you see a watch perspective, that world was very unique and very nice, because there were hardly any products which would show you time. So there were no mobile phones, there were no laptops or PDAs. So watch was having monopoly of time. Okay, and it was considered to be one of the really prized possession. People used to enjoy owning the watch. So watch was enjoying that cult in that way. Now, in current situation, in current context, time is everywhere. Okay, you don't need a watch to see a time. Okay, so it's very important for a watch designer or watch industry in general to recraft the whole watch proposition in a way so that we can attract younger clients to our store, essentially. So having said that, it's not that people are not buying the watches. Okay, Titan is selling close to 15 million watches every year, and our growth rate is also pretty high. So people are still buying the watches, but I think the purpose of purchase has changed drastically. So you don't buy a watch for seeing the time. You buy a watch because it completes your look, because it's a fashion statement. It's more of fashion accessory. So for us, I think the other challenge is to figure out newer consumer insights, okay, and newer use cases, which can, bring younger audience in a very great way to the watch buying space.
Can you also briefly tell us how was or in form of a case study, like how was Titan Edge as a watch evolved, or what were the constraints and how did you come about it, like a form of a case study in a nutshell?
So, well, see, Titan Edge is the slimmest watch in the world. Okay. So mechanism is just 1.1 mm thick. Okay. So it's that thin mechanism. Okay. So the challenges were to craft a watch and propose to consumer essentially and give all the design details while respecting the thinness of the mechanism.
Correct.
Okay. So the first watch which we launched, okay, that is the first Edge, this was just 3.6 mm. Okay. Wow. So imagine the mechanism itself is a 1.1 mm and the overall dial, strap, hands and everything all put together, the case was just 3.7 mm. Okay. So that was the, I think, biggest manufacturing challenge in terms of giving the correct design tolerances, still giving the look of the watch which people will appreciate while retaining the slimness. But problem with that mechanism, that mechanism torque was not that big. Okay. So torque is actually a function which drives the hand. Okay. So if your torque is not that big, then your hands will be slightly smaller. Okay. So what we noticed few years back, that people are looking for a bigger watches. Okay. So the moment you go for a bigger watches, obviously smaller hands might not look nice. Okay. So with the Edge skeletal, which we launched few years back, we have crafted a new construction, which is a case-in-case construction, where two cases are joined together and mechanisms are held with 2 sapphire glass. Okay, so that was very unique construction. So in that way, we have respected the torque of the movement and still given a user an option of buying a slightly bigger watch. So that was the Red Dot award which we got for the that skeletal edge watch.
Superb. So with the new technology coming in watches, like I've seen few of the TED Talks where Ken Robinson was narrating a story where he said that his daughter, I think, said, "What a useless watch! It just shows time." So yeah, the question is geared towards that with the new technology coming in and like the watch having just 2 simple functions is perceived to be a useless watch, right? So say for example, also when the Apple Watch came in, like Rolex, who have probably just ruled the entire world, came down to like 2nd or 3rd position in the best watches thing. So how you as a designer or engineers working in this domain are gearing up for these challenges, and what is changing in the industry because of the smartwatch coming in the picture?
Well, Kedar, I think it's too early to write an obituary for these quartz watches. They're humble looking smart quartz watches. I think they will survive. It's just a matter of time. Having said that, I think wearables are next big thing. We all know. And according to IDC, which is International Data Corporation, this year there'll be 2 billion pieces of wearables. Okay, they'll be shipped from China factories. Okay, so imagine that kind of number will definitely have some impact on traditional watch market.
Correct.
But designers and engineers, I think they are at a slightly comfortable place because they have knowledge of wrist-based accessory. They have very strong consumer insights, okay, which they have built over a period of time. So it's just a matter of reskilling or upskilling. So that's what we are doing at Titan. We are learning new skills. We are upskilling ourselves with respect to interaction design, physical computing, sensor and electronics, PCBs, so that we can swing along the smart wave, essentially. And in fact, in Titan, the line, or you can say lines between traditional design disciplines, okay, they're also blurring very fast. So an interaction designer is working with the fashion designer, and fashion designer is working with the product designer to recraft the whole watch proposition in a way so that we can, give consumer a newer product portfolio to choose from. So I think we are taking all the steps to swing along the smart wave. Yeah.
So from a design standpoint, are there any particular direction you guys are taking towards, or is it more from an engineering standpoint only?
So I think
design goes independent anyways.
No, design. Design is always is a purpose-driven concept. Okay, there have to be function which needs to be served. And what happened with smartwatches, the consumer insight are very unique. Okay, so people are buying smartwatches for some function. So either it's for health or music, or so as long as you're justifying that function and crafting a design story around it, I think you will survive. So I think it's also a matter of choosing the right use cases and use scenarios. So I think we are crafting the whole story based on the emerging use cases and use scenarios.
Interesting. So Mahendra, I would like to conclude with one last question. I think you have touched upon this answer to a certain extent, but just to reinforce or just to understand better, why are watches so expensive? Sorry, excuse me for this question, but it's a very question which is very close to my heart and want to get different insights into it. So why are watches so expensive if all of them show the same time, right?
Yeah, that's interesting.
It may sound very stupid question, but I'm hoping to get some radical differences between 2 different watches, one being
yeah, so Kedar, I think that's an interesting question. But fact of the matter is that none of the watchmakers, okay, they're selling time. Okay, and that's the irony of being in watch industry. We are not selling time. Luxury watchmakers are selling craftsmanship, where individual watch case takes multiple weeks to get assembled, where movement takes multiple months to get ready. where dial and finishes are done by world's best artist and craftsperson, where polishing of the case is done by people who have spent their entire life polishing micro objects, okay, and still their hands don't even sway a single okay. So clearly we are not selling time. We are selling something more big. We are selling something more precious. We are selling something which you can pass on to next generation, okay. Yeah, so that's why the luxury watches are expensive, and they also tell time. So I think the whole proposition is very different.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. So Mahendra, I think this is it. That's all I had thought of. Obviously, there are thousands of things to be explored further, and maybe we can have another GAN session just to ponder more upon like one watch and how detailed you can go into it, and what are those micro differences which are there.
Definitely, Kedar.
Yeah,
I think it was pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, so I think this is a good note to end this. Thank you once again for giving us your time, and it was real fun talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's it from today's Gyan session. Catch us on iTunes, Saavn, Stitcher or any podcasting app you use. Do rate us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Stay tuned for more Gyan on audiogyan.com. Till then, bye.